You ever have one of those days where everything just clicks, but not in some feel-good surface level way? I mean, a day where your entire perception of life changes so radically that you know there's no going back. That was me one day. One realization. 11 principles. And the truth is, it wasn't some magical intervention. It was biology. It was neuroscience. It was clarity, harnessed, not hoped for. You see, we often underestimate how rapidly the human brain can reorganize when it receives the right inputs. Neuroplasticity isn't some theoretical concept buried in textbooks. It's happening right now in you. And what I discovered was this: if you align your internal systems, your focus, your energy, your physiology with the right principles, you don't just improve, you transform in hours. Sometimes in minutes. The first principle, leverage your visual system. I realized that where and how I direct my gaze changes my entire mental state. You want focus. Narrow your visual field. Want calm. Broaden it. This isn't philosophy. This is your autonomic nervous system responding to your eye position. That one tweak gave me command over stress and performance instantly. The second principle, deliberate cold exposure. I didn't think stepping into discomfort could rewire my brain so fast. But when I voluntarily subjected myself to cold, I triggered a cascade of norepinephrine, dopamine, and a sense of control that no motivational video ever gave me. That 10 minutes in cold water gave me 24 hours of sharpened cognition and grit. Then came non-sleep deep rest. Most people burn out because they never truly recover. But when I began implementing NSDR protocols, 10 to 20 minutes of guided rest, I noticed something surreal. Not only did I think more clearly, but my retention of information, my mood, even my sleep quality elevated dramatically. Principle 4 was movement. Not just exercise, intentional movement tied to goal-directed behavior. When you walk while mentally rehearsing your goals, your brain links those thoughts to motion, turning intentions into embodied cognition. I started doing this daily. Ideas that once felt distant, they started becoming actions. Fifth, I stopped chasing motivation. Instead, I relied on dopamine scheduling. I controlled when and how I accessed rewards. I broke the loop of instant gratification and started achieving more by making dopamine a tool, not a trap. When you delay rewards strategically, your brain rewires for discipline. Sixth principle, sleep is sacred. Not optional, not casual. Sacred. I started protecting my sleep window like my life depended on it. Because in a neurobiological sense, it does. Every memory, mood, and moment of high performance in your life hinges on the architecture of your sleep. Seventh was breath work, but not in a mystical way, in a tactical way. 2 inhales followed by an extended exhale, just one cycle, and your carbon dioxide levels drop, your vagus nerve activates, and your heart rate slows. I use this before big decisions. It changes the way I think, biologically. 8th, seek challenge voluntarily. When I made hard things my choice, they lost the power to scare me. Voluntary challenge recruits the prefrontal cortex and reshapes your identity. I stopped waiting for motivation. I made pain a proving ground. 9th principle, sunlight. I never realized that exposing my eyes to natural light in the first hour of waking would stabilize my cortisol, anchor my circadian rhythm, and elevate my baseline mood. But it did, every single day since. 10th, limit screen dopamine. I began creating friction before accessing apps. Suddenly, the hijacking of my attention stopped. My productivity doubled, not from effort, but from control. And finally, the 11th principle, identity-based neuroplasticity. When I began asking not, what do I want, but who am I becoming through this? My brain adapted accordingly. Behavior followed belief, and that belief wasn't motivational fluff. It was a scientifically grounded shift in self-perception. So yes, one day, 11 principles. No hacks, no gimmicks, just biology leveraged, habits aligned, and the brain brought online, not just to survive, but to evolve. And once that switch flips, you don't return to the old circuitry. You build new ones, and they build you. Let me take you deeper into the first principle, because this one alone can flip the switch on your ability to focus, regulate emotions, and enter peak states on command. It all starts with your eyes. Now, most people think of vision as just a passive process. Light comes in image forms we see, but that's a misunderstanding of how your visual system works. Your eyes aren't just sensing the world, they are controlling your brain's state moment by moment. And once you understand this, you can start using it as a tool, precisely, predictably, and powerfully. Here's what I realized: the brain follows the eyes. When you narrow your field of view, literally, when you focus your gaze on a single point in space, you engage a system in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus. This activates norepinephrine, a neurochemical responsible for alertness and vigilance. You're turning on your attentional spotlight. This is not metaphorical, it's physiological. So when I need to lock in, to read, to write, to solve a hard problem, I consciously bring my visual field into a tight central focus. And what happens? My mental chatter drops. My body primes for action. Focus isn't something I wait for, it's something I generate. But the inverse is just as powerful. When I feel overwhelmed or anxious, I don't try to think my way into calm. I shift my gaze to panoramic vision, relaxing my eyes, softening my focus, letting my awareness expand to the edges of my field of view. This activates the parasympathetic wing of the autonomic nervous system. Cortisol levels drop, heart rate slows. My system shifts from threat to safety. Again, it's not about mindset, it's about mechanism. You are directly modulating your internal state through your external focus. Think about what that means. You no longer have to wait for the right mood to focus or the right conditions to calm down. You don't need external motivation or emotional regulation tools. You have a built-in hardwired controller sitting right behind your eyes, and once you start using it, you gain access to performance states most people only stumble into by accident. For me, the day I started applying this wasn't just a better day. It was a total recalibration of how I engage with the world and how I direct the power of my own brain. Now, let's talk about something most people avoid, but your nervous system craves: cold exposure. This second principle was a game changer, not because it's trendy or extreme, but because it showed me what it means to be in control of my internal state. On the surface, stepping into cold water feels like punishment. But what it actually is, biologically, is one of the fastest and most effective ways to train your brain and body for stress tolerance, focus, and mood elevation. And this isn't just anecdotal, it's neurochemical. Here's what's happening under the surface. When you expose your body to cold, especially something like a cold shower or an ice bath, your body releases a surge of norepinephrine, a powerful molecule that enhances alertness, focus, and even mood. It also increases dopamine by up to 250% above baseline. That's not a small bump. That's a neurochemical spike comparable to some forms of intense reward, but without the crash. And that dopamine elevation isn't short-lived, it sustains. We're talking about hours of increased drive, motivation, and elevated mood, all triggered by a few minutes of discomfort. But here's what really matters: it's voluntary discomfort. That's the key. When you willingly step into stress, like cold exposure, you send a message to your brain: I'm in charge. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision making and control, stays online. That's critical, because most people experience stress passively. They react. But cold exposure is active. You choose it, and that builds a level of stress resilience that starts bleeding into the rest of your life. You stop fearing discomfort. You become adapted to it. For me, that one practice, just a few minutes in cold water, started to override the mental loops I used to get trapped in. Worry, overthinking, hesitation, all of it got quieter. Not because it magically went away, but because I taught my nervous system how to stay regulated in the face of challenge. And the physiological effects are measurable. Heart rate variability improves. Inflammation markers go down. Mental clarity goes up. It's not psychological grit, it's physiological readiness. So when people ask me how I stay focused, how I stay motivated, how I stay calm under pressure, the answer isn't mindset. It's cold water. It's my nervous system trained by experience, not theory. And the moment I made that choice to use discomfort as a tool, my entire baseline for what I thought I could handle shifted. The third principle I leaned into was non-sleep deep rest, what we now call an SDR. And I'll be honest, this one seemed almost too simple at first. But the science behind it is undeniable. Most people are running on depleted neural resources. They hit a wall halfway through the day, and instead of recovering, they push harder, consume more caffeine, or scroll mindlessly on their phone thinking that's a break. It's not. What your brain actually needs in those moments is targeted recovery. And NSDR delivers that with precision. Here's what happens during NSDR, which can be as short as 10 to 20 minutes. Your body enters a state of deep relaxation while your mind remains aware. It's not sleep, and it's not meditation in the traditional sense. It's more like a guided drop into a neurological reset. What's happening in the brain is profound. You're allowing your default mode network to downregulate. You're offloading mental residue, consolidating information, and, crucially, restoring dopamine receptor sensitivity. This means that after NSDR, your brain is more responsive to rewards, more focused, and more capable of sustained attention. What really struck me was how immediate the benefits were. After just one session, I found my ability to retain complex information, whether it was from reading scientific papers or running through strategic planning, was significantly higher. And the state I entered afterward wasn't just rested, it was primed. Primed for creativity, learning, even decision-making under pressure. I started using NSDR as a tool, not just to recover, but to sharpen. And the data backs this up. NSDR enhances neuroplasticity. That means it increases your brain's capacity to change itself in response to learning. So now, imagine stacking this right after a workout or an intense learning session. You're not just recovering, you're locking in the gains, physical and mental. You're reinforcing new neural pathways by giving the system time and space to integrate. I began to insert these NSDR breaks into my day with surgical precision. One after a focused work block, another in the late afternoon to reset my nervous system and reduce the cortisol buildup. And what happened was clear. I no longer ended my days drained. I ended them recharged, calm, and clear. Not from more hours of sleep, but from a deeper understanding of how recovery works. The fourth principle that completely shifted my trajectory was movement, but not in the conventional go to the gym and grind sense. I'm talking about deliberate, goal-oriented movement. Here's what I found when you pair physical movement, especially walking, with internal problem solving or goal visualization. You activate a very specific mechanism in the brain that hardwires those thoughts into action pathways. You're not just thinking, you're embodying. You're aligning cognition with locomotion, which taps into ancient neural circuitry designed for pursuit and progress. This is something we now understand through neuroscience. When you move forward in space, especially at a steady pace, you stimulate the brain's dopaminergic systems. And what's interesting is that it's not tied to reward, it's tied to pursuit. Meaning the act of moving while thinking about something important, like a challenge or a future goal, creates a forward driving neural state. This is evolutionary. Our species evolved to solve problems on the move, not sitting still at a desk overthinking. So I started applying this with surgical intent. Instead of sitting and journaling or whiteboarding goals, I walked, often for 30 to 45 minutes, with a very specific question or vision in mind, something I was trying to solve or create. And what happened was fascinating insights came faster, emotional blocks loosened, and my mental clarity became razor sharp. I wasn't trying to force motivation. It was showing up organically through motion. On a neurochemical level, this makes complete sense. Movement increases the release of dopamine, epinephrine, and brain-derived neurotrophic factors, BDNF, all of which are critical for learning, motivation, and mental agility. But what matters most is the sequencing. You move while you think, not before, not after. You anchor the thought into the action. That's what encodes the neural circuitry that makes follow-through feel natural, even inevitable. It also had another unexpected effect. It reduced anxiety. Because when you think while moving, you're less likely to loop or ruminate. Your visual field is dynamic, your vestibular system is engaged, and your threat detection system gets downregulated. You're literally signaling to your brain, we're in control, we're in motion, we're solving. That completely shifted my relationship to decision making. Things that once felt paralyzing became manageable, not because the challenges changed, but because I changed the state in which I engaged them. The fifth principle that reshaped my performance and discipline was learning how to manage dopamine. Not chasing it, but scheduling it. This was a complete reframing for me. Most people think of dopamine as a reward chemical, but the truth is, dopamine is not about the reward itself. It's about the pursuit. It's about motivation, drive, and the willingness to engage effort over time. And once you understand how to control when and how your dopamine is released, you can stop being pulled around by your impulses and start using your own biology to stay consistent, focused, and resilient. Here's what I found when you engage in something that's challenging work, training, learning. You're expending effort. That effort feels harder when you're constantly spiking dopamine through external rewards, social media, junk, food, shallow entertainment. Every time you flood your system with easy dopamine, you blunt your brain's sensitivity to it. So then, when you sit down to do something meaningful, it feels dull. Your motivation drops, not because the work is wrong, but because your baseline is broken. So I made a deliberate shift. I stopped rewarding myself during effort. No music during hard work. No treats during workouts. No checking my phone for tiny dopamine hits while writing or solving problems. I moved the reward to after the work. And what happened was profound. My baseline dopamine started to recalibrate. The actual work, the effort itself, began to feel more intrinsically satisfying because my brain started linking the action to the reward, not the distraction. The science behind this is very clear. Intermittent, delayed rewards strengthen dopaminergic tone. You're not just experiencing pleasure, you're increasing your capacity for sustained effort. You're literally rewiring your brain to crave challenge. And over time, that builds discipline, not through willpower, through neurochemistry. This also made my motivation more stable. I wasn't riding highs and crashing lows anymore. I had energy when I needed it, and I could go deeper into tasks without feeling burned out. Even when things got boring or difficult, which they always do, I didn't need external stimulation to keep going. My system had learned to engage effort as its own source of momentum. When I understood that dopamine is a tool, not just a feeling, I stopped trying to trick myself into productivity. I started creating it biochemically by design. And from that point on, I wasn't just working harder, I was working smarter with a nervous system calibrated for consistency. The sixth principle was something we all think we understand, but most of us radically underestimate sleep. Not just more sleep or better sleep, but treating sleep as sacred. What shifted everything for me wasn't just tracking my sleep or optimizing it. It was prioritizing it above everything else, knowing that nothing I wanted to achieve physically, cognitively, emotionally could exist without it. Sleep isn't recovery. Sleep is construction. It's where memory is stabilized, where emotional regulation is recalibrated, where your immune system, hormone system, and cognitive function all get rebuilt. And here's what the science tells us: even one night of sleep deprivation or poor quality sleep dramatically reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain you need for focus, impulse control, decision making, and emotional regulation. You also see increased amygdala reactivity, which means your system becomes more emotionally volatile. You're more likely to overact, to ruminate, to lose clarity. So if you're trying to build discipline, create, learn, lead, or simply function at a high level, you can't do it on a broken sleep schedule. I started being militant about my sleep-wake timing, going to sleep and waking up at roughly the same time every day, even on weekends. Why? Because your circadian rhythm is not just a passive biological clock, it's the master controller of your hormones, your cortisol, your melatonin, your dopamine. It determines your alertness window, your energy output, your emotional tone. Every function downstream of that rhythm depends on its stability. So I anchored mine with consistency and morning sunlight. I stopped using screens late into the night. I began creating a when-down protocol: dim lights, cool environment, no food 2 hours before sleep. And I protected that process like my performance depended on it. Because it does. What happened next wasn't subtle. My cognitive speed increased. My mood stabilized. I could handle more stress with less effort. And maybe most importantly, my ability to learn and retain complex information skyrocketed. That's because deep sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, is when the hippocampus consolidates short-term memories into long-term storage. If you're not getting high-quality deep sleep, you're not retaining what you learn. You're running hard but not adapting. Sleep went from being something I tried to fit into my schedule to becoming the foundation everything else rested on. When that clicked, I stopped burning out, I started building up, and everything changed. The seventh principle I integrated was breath work, specifically the use of controlled, intentional breathing to rapidly shift my physiological and psychological state. Now, this isn't about meditation, and it's not about spiritual rituals. This is about hardwired biology. Your breath is the only part of your autonomic nervous system, your internal regulation system, that you can directly control in real time. And once you understand that, you stop using willpower to manage stress and start using your body as a tool to regulate your brain. The most effective protocol I've found is something we call the physiological sigh. It's 2 short inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long, extended exhale through the mouth. 1 cycle takes less than 5 seconds. And what's remarkable is what it does to your system almost instantly. That double inhale helps reinflate the alveoli in the lungs, those little air sacs that collapse under stress. It reduces carbon dioxide levels, which in turn calms the chemoreceptors that trigger stress responses. The long exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling safety and slowing your heart rate. I started using this in very specific moments, before high-stakes calls, in the middle of overwhelming work blocks. after emotionally charged conversations. Just 1 or 2 rounds, and I could feel the shift. My thinking got clearer. My muscles relaxed. I was back in control, not because I talked myself down, but because I pulled the right lever in my physiology. And what's powerful here is that this isn't psychological, it's mechanical. You're literally changing your internal state through breath. We know from studies that just 5 minutes of deliberate breath work can lead to reductions in cortisol, improvements in heart rate variability, and enhanced focus. But for me, the real value came from using it tactically, knowing that I had a built-in switch I could flip anywhere, anytime to take myself out of a reactive state and into a responsive one. That's real power. That's resilience on demand. Over time, my baseline stress levels started to lower. I became less reactive, more composed, and more deliberate, not because the world got easier, but because I trained my system to stay grounded no matter how chaotic the input. All of that from something as simple and accessible as a breath. The 8th principle I applied was seeking voluntary challenge, and this one rewired my entire framework for how I interpret discomfort, fear, and pressure. What I realized is that the nervous system doesn't just respond to stress. It responds to whether you chose it or not. That distinction is everything. When stress is imposed on you, your brain defaults to survival mode, reactivity, defensiveness, emotional volatility. But when you voluntarily step into stress, the same stimulus triggers a completely different neural pathway. You engage the prefrontal cortex, maintain cognitive control, and begin to shift your identity, not just how you act, but who you believe you are. This became crystal clear to me the first time I deliberately took on a physical challenge I didn't want to do. It was early, it was cold, and my body resisted. But I said to myself, you're choosing this. That single shift changed everything. My perception of effort was lower. My sense of capability increased. My neurochemistry adapted. Why? Because voluntary challenge doesn't just test you. It trains your brain to associate effort with growth, not threat. The neuroscience supports this. When you enter a difficult situation by choice, you increase dopaminergic tone even before the outcome. That means your brain starts to reward you for engaging the challenge, not just for completing it. You reinforce courage, resilience, and self-efficacy at a neurobiological level. This is how real confidence is built, not by positive self-talk, but by consistently showing your brain that discomfort is not the enemy. It's the signal for expansion. So I began doing this daily, small ways and big ways, taking cold plunges not because I wanted to, but because I didn't, choosing the harder version of a task, saying yes to things that scared me, not recklessly, but intentionally. And the ripple effect was undeniable. I started responding to unexpected stress, life's curveballs, with more poise, more clarity, and less panic. My brain had been trained. Stress doesn't mean stop. It means go, but go deliberately with focus. That reframe on its own built a kind of mental toughness I had never accessed before. And it wasn't because I became fearless. It was because I started conditioning my system to interpret fear as fuel. The challenge didn't shrink. I grew into it by choice every time. The 9th principle that transformed my life was understanding the profound impact of morning sunlight on my entire system. This may sound deceptively simple, but what I've learned through both science and experience is that exposing yourself to natural light, ideally within the first 30 minutes of waking, is one of the most powerful resets you can give your brain and body. It's not just a nice to have thing for energy. It's a fundamental biological trigger that anchors your circadian rhythm and, by extension, governs everything from sleep quality to cognitive performance and emotional balance. Here's what happens at the physiological level. The light that hits your eyes, particularly blue light in the early morning, sends a signal to a part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which sits in the hypothalamus. This signal sets the clock for your entire circadian system, regulating melatonin production, cortisol rhythms, and even body temperature. If you get this light exposure within that window of the first 30 minutes after waking, you're essentially telling your brain, it's time to be alert, focused, and ready for the day. Without this, your brain stays stuck in a kind of jet lag mode with the internal clock out of sync. This is why people who don't get sunlight in the morning often feel sluggish, foggy, or even depressed throughout the day. I started prioritizing morning sunlight intentionally, stepping outside for a walk, even for just 10 to 15 minutes as soon as I woke up. No sunglasses, no screens, just the natural light hitting my eyes. The change was immediate. My energy levels during the day became more stable. I no longer had that post-lunch slump, and I started waking up feeling more alert with a sharper mental state. But what really shocked me was how much my sleep quality improved. Because I gave my circadian rhythm a clear, consistent anchor in the morning, my sleep became deeper, more restorative. I felt less anxious at night, and I woke up naturally at the right time, no alarms needed. What's more, morning sunlight doesn't just affect the timing of your sleep. It regulates your mood. Studies show that getting natural light in the first part of the day can help mitigate symptoms of depression and improve your overall sense of well-being. It's like hitting a reset button on your emotional state every single morning. And this principle alone, when coupled with everything else, was one of the easiest ways I found to shift my baseline for energy, focus, and overall performance. By simply walking outside for a few minutes and letting the light hit my eyes, I could set the tone for my entire day. The 10th principle that radically changed the course of my life was the deliberate cultivation of social connections, but with an emphasis on quality, not quantity. In the hustle and grind of modern life, it's easy to overlook the importance of meaningful relationships. But what I came to realize through both research and lived experience is that the depth of your social bonds has a profound impact on your mental and physical health. It affects your stress levels, your cognitive performance, and even your lifespan. We are social creatures wired to thrive in connection, not isolation. Yet, most of us operate in a world where the surface-level connections seem more accessible and easier to maintain. Here's the science. When you spend time with people you care about, people who make you feel seen, heard, and understood, you trigger a cascade of neurochemicals, primarily oxytocin. This is often called the bonding hormone, but it does far more than create emotional closeness. Oxytocin has powerful effects on reducing stress, improving immune function, and enhancing overall well-being. But here's the catch. This doesn't happen just by being in the same room with someone. It's the quality of the interaction that matters. Shallow interactions don't trigger the same response as deep, meaningful conversations or experiences. I started being far more intentional about who I spent time with, how I spent time with them, and why I was connecting. I stopped forcing myself into social situations that felt draining or inauthentic. Instead,